All right. It is Friday, December 9th, still 2022, and you are live on Shally's Alley. Apologies about the being late. Inevitable. We had a little bit of an emergency that we needed to attend to, but I really wanted to bring on special guest Anthony Ysasaga. And I'm gonna let him say a couple of things. But first of all, did I say your last name correctly? I always ask you, but
You
is
said it
that
perfect.
correct?
That's perfect. Exactly correct. Yeah,
Cool.
nice
All
to see
right.
you.
All right. Well, guys, I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm trying this new mobile format. In case any of you out there are on mobile phones, if you're on a PC and this looks kind of weird, drop me a note in the chat. But if I'm assuming a lot of folks are just using their mobile phone or their tablet, so hopefully this is a little bit nicer. So feel free to drop a note in the chat. By way of introduction, so Tony and I worked together for a short while. He's also worked at companies like Accenture, Korn Ferry, PwC, some pretty big names, as well as Sabre. If you don't know who Sabre is, basically every time you get your baggage at the airport, it's probably because of Sabre. That's
That's
not all
right.
they do. They do a lot of other things.
That's right.
And if you ever bought any baggage, you probably bought it at JC Penny, also where Anthony used to work. So
Right.
what's that?
That's right. That's correct.
Kind of bringing it all together, right?
Yeah,
So what I
yeah.
wanted to ask you about and just kind of dive into a little bit is this whole sourcing sprint thing that you are. I don't know if you're like you coined it or you are specializing in it, but I'm really intrigued by it. First of all, what is a sourcing sprint team?
Yeah, sourcing sprint team means that you have been assigned to a position that is a critical need within the organization. So it's a position that either has some high visibility or maybe a position that has been aging for some time. And so part of that sprint team means that I have to develop talent in very short order. And with that, generally, I'll have some notes on the intake call that occurred, looking at some of the essentials, but really gathering as much people as possible. And the difficult part about that is really managing candidate pipeline, developing prospects, and marketing to them, but keeping it all organized. So I would think that my experience has shown that pipelining is probably the most difficult thing that you can do in terms of developing candidates and being able to manage the people that you reached out to and continuing to follow up with the people that haven't responded. But yeah, sprint team is someone that's really aggressively involved in developing a lot of candidates in a very short time.
Okay, what does a lot mean?
What is a lot? So I would say that in any given week, 8 to 10 candidates is something that I can probably produce for a mid-level position. If it's an executive position, I'd probably say 2 to 3 candidates.
What in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours?
Gotcha, gotcha. No, that's generally a week.
Got it.
And these are individuals that the sprint team will go through and they'll identify candidates. So first of all, obviously you can't do this in an hour because you've got to be able to reach out to individuals.
Gotta Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. You gotta
Yeah,
contact them.
you got to get the responses. Once you get the responses, you set up the calls, and then you do a quick screening call. Once you do the screening call, then here's what I do. I mean, I really look at kind of the top prospects that have responded, and once I do that, I'll make a list of the people that I think would be good targets for the position. And once I look at the targets, and I'll schedule interviews, and then generally, once I interview those people, maybe 50% will make the cut. And of those people that make the cut, then I'll really look at and scrutinize the information from the screening call to determine which ones I want to present to the hiring manager. Because ultimately, what we're measured on, most of the companies that I've worked with, the metrics that they measure on is really the not just the productivity, but the amount of people that actually end up getting an offer. So it's of the people that you submit. We look at the metrics of the people that the people you submit to the hiring manager, then there's a certain percentage that the hiring manager will select. And of those that they select, then they'll interview those individuals. And of those people, there's a certain number, that certain percentage that will go to the tech screen. And then from that, there's going to be a certain percentage that goes to the final screen. and then an offer is generally made at that point. So that's a general overview of the process. And week by week, and I will tell you that if I'm targeting a mid-level position, I'm going to send. I know this sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but I'd say anywhere between 125 to 150 emails per week. And of that, there's a certain percentage of responses that I'm going to be receiving, and of those, that I'm going to select the individuals that I want to move forward with.
Got it. Okay. So there's a team part of this. You said sourcing sprint team, and what I was curious about is, well, first of all, I don't know if you're currently in a role where you're doing this or not, but what I was curious about with this sourcing sprint team thing that you're talking about is the team aspect of it, right? So let's say, I don't know, I'm going to take a guess. Let's say a sprint team, maybe 4 people. Are all 4 people working on the same position? And if so, how do you divide and conquer so that you're not stepping on each other's toes, right? Like I'm thinking a sourcing sprint team is kind of similar to like a squad, like a development squad. And in the military, squads are usually, small teams of 5 or so, and each one has their specialization, and each one has like a job to do. So am I thinking about this correctly? Is this the same, or is it just a team of 5 people that do 5 different things?
No, it is. So generally, the last squad that I was a part of, the last sprint team, so I worked at Korn Ferry supporting HPE. And with that, we had 7 people that were on the team. We each had individual responsibilities. Like in the military, you become specialized, and you have a certain area that you're responsible for. And in that, you're a subject matter expert. And so my area of expertise was software engineering and software systems engineering. So I would focus on those particular positions. So HPE would have a number of positions open, and so I was the team lead. So essentially, I would go through and I would assign the positions to the individuals on the squad that had a particular skill set that they were siloed in. And with that, they had the responsibility of. And by the way, when we did this as a team, we all had positions that we were working on, but everyone was responsible for a certain number of metrics, right? So we had to have we had to hit certain thresholds of activity per week. And so, the expectations were really high in terms of what we were looking for. And, with that, if they weren't, my responsibility as a team leader, squad lead, was just if they weren't hitting the numbers, maybe providing the team that I was supporting some of the details of things that they need to be doing, or maybe I can talk to them about where they're sourcing, or maybe where their fishing ponds are, and I need to at least evaluate why they aren't up to par in terms of activity. And so with that, I provide suggestions in terms of developing candidates. And so I've got different outlets, and I have a sourcing outline plan that I have, and I want to make sure that all the avenues are covered. And if they're able to do that, they should be able to hit the numbers. But sometimes people, especially on sprint teams, they're so heavily involved in terms of looking at the numbers and what they need to develop. Sometimes they lose sight of the individual things that they need to do right in order to be able to achieve their objectives.
Okay. All right. So in the sprint team, you're the squad leader, or if it's a squad or whatever, you are someone, and I'm not just singling you out here, but in the sprint team, you are a squad leader, point person, and your job's not to do all the work, and your job's not to boss people around. You just are, leading the charge, and you've got your own things that you got to do. And if somebody's falling behind, you know what to do to kind of help bring them back up.
I do. Yeah.
But what I want to get to is the I'm thinking like a Delta Force, or Force Recon or something like that, where there's 5 people. One of them's obviously the squad leader, and the other 4 each have a specialization. One of them is demolitions, another one's weapons, another one might be intel, another one might be canine, or whatever, right? So is that how this is? So you got one sourcer that does one thing, or like how does that work?
Yeah. So they're siloed up into different categories. So within the sprint team, I mean, the sprint team supports all of HPE and all of their, IT positions. And so what we do is we silo those into different areas. One is pure engineering, another one's hardware engineering, another one is there's Jeremy. Hey, Jeremy. Another one would be the systems engineering. Another one would be software engineering. And then there's operations. And we also have individuals that were assigned to, I'd say, some of the corporate operations positions. So they were siloed into those different areas. So yeah, just like you said, I mean, we essentially had the different responsibilities assigned to each of the sprint team members, and each of them had a specialization in that particular area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And now I get the whole, if one of them isn't performing, then kind of the whole team sort of, falls behind, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I
Right.
have a system, like a checklist that I go through that even with this silo team, the checklist itself is it does a sweep of everything that needs to be considered. And with that, I'm also able to help them with the Boolean strings if they have a hard time developing that. But most of it's just really going through with the sourcing checklist. I mean, essentially, I have them go through the internal database first. If this is something you want to go through.
Right. You've got your plan, your sourcing
Yeah,
plan, right? And also, I'm assuming they're doing the outreach, so you've got communications and other things that you need to look at as well, right? Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. We're also looking at the metrics. So whenever we have an individual that is sending out marketing messages, we want to look at the percentage of responses that they're receiving. And I also look at, yes, I can share the checklist. I also, am involved with, what percentage of responses are they getting? What do they need to do to maybe recraft their message? Because everyone has their own individual message, and sometimes it just doesn't speak to the audience, maybe as it should. And so I've got some templates that I utilize to be able to do that. And so I've worked with a number of different companies and, in a number of different areas, mostly within IT. But, they're in particular, if you're selling an opportunity to a data engineer, selling the opportunity and saying, hey, this is an opportunity with a great company and you can make at least 20% more than you're making now. Data scientists aren't interested in that. They're interested in the type of technology that you're utilizing. So you need to be able to use that selling technique and say, hey, listen, we're working with some of the best tech, available, and you mentioned some of the tech that you're talking about in the email or the intro email. So you want to be able to do what you can to entice these individuals to respond and at least, not make it sound like a sales pitch. Most of the time, when I do reach out or some of these marketing emails that I send out, is really just asking for their expertise and really just saying, hey, look, I'm really intrigued by your background. I'm working here. Here's some of the tech that we're using. I'd like to at least discuss with you, or if you have 15 minutes to at least discuss some ideas about maybe where I can target some real good candidates. And I mean, it seems to work. I mean, for me, I get a large number of responses. So with the number of emails that I send out per week, and like I said, it's between 125 and 150. I'm probably getting about 20 to 30% responses on a good week.
Okay. 20 to 35 on the first outreach or after a series.
Say that again. Sorry, you
So
cut out.
like 20 to 35 percent response rate on that first outreach,
Correct.
or is it like after the second, the third, or like a cumulative?
It's generally on the first outreach,
Okay, yeah.
and with that, I couple that. I mean, yeah,
Subsequent rounds, you would have an increase in that response rate. Yeah.
that's right. And I have I have an Excel spreadsheet where I type in my target first name, last name, where they're working, and their email address. And generally what I'll do is I'll hit LinkedIn first, and then if I don't get a response on LinkedIn, then what I'll do is I'll follow up with this macro-enabled spreadsheet that I created, and automatically sends emails via Outlook, and it follows up with them saying, hey, I sent you an email via Outlook. You may not have had a chance to look at it, or maybe got caught in your spam folder, but here's a little synopsis of what we're looking for, or maybe what I was asking. And if you have an opportunity, I'd really appreciate a response. And so it elicits responses. I mean, you have to be tenacious about this. And if you are, I think you can, you're not going to have trouble at all developing candidates.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. You've gotta keep tuning it, right? Keep editing it and tuning it.
You have to,
Um,
yeah. And and here's what I say all the time, to the people that have reported to me, and even to some of the people that I work. You have to think. You have to be very present in terms of what you're doing, because you can't just go through the motions. You have to think about what you're doing. You have to reevaluate everything you're doing. You've got to continue to fine tune everything that you're working on, because this is a very, very dynamic situation. This isn't some static role where you just you flip a switch and then you get the results. I mean, you've got to
even if you automate parts of it, you still, you're still monitoring and pivoting and shifting
think
the automation. Yeah, yeah,
100%. I
exactly.
can't even tell you how many times I've changed the message in an outreach. Um,
Midstream. Right.
yeah, yeah, exactly right.
Yep. That makes sense. So, something else that I wanted to ask you about. So, you landed at a new position, right? You just
Right.
started a new gig. There's been a lot of people switching jobs lately because of all the cuts and everything that's been going on. So, um, give us your best advice for a sourcer that's on a contract and just landed in a new place and wants to basically show immediate value. Like, what's the best thing? Maybe not the single best thing, but maybe the top three things that they should be doing immediately to demonstrate value, so that the business doesn't start looking at them in a week and go, they're not producing results. What's going on?
That's a great question. So, and I have a great answer. As a matter of fact, a number of the positions that I received. So, whenever I'm looking for a job, I literally target the people that I want to work for, the companies that I want to work for, and then I specifically choose targets, and reach out to them. And I've got access to their phone numbers, personal email addresses, and whatnot. But once I get there and I have an opportunity and I get my foot in the door, especially for individuals that are just now getting jobs, and so not a lot of people or not a lot of companies are hiring full time. So if you get your foot in the door, the most important thing you can do is be constantly engaged. The thing that impresses clients most, and I've done this too with contractors, is I'm really impressed by the individuals that continue to ask questions, that want to continue to learn. They said, you know what, and a lot of people go through the initial training, especially contractors. Like when I was working at Accenture, we had to learn the systems, and we had to learn how they worked in Taleo, and they've got a super business edition of Taleo that they utilize, and it's difficult to learn. And it took us a week of training, but in that, I've really found a way to ask a lot of questions. And the people that I'm reporting to, like, look, I've got questions. And what's funny about training is a lot of people will sit through training and just go, okay, I get it, but they don't ask questions and they try to figure things out on their own. If you're engaged with the employer, and you're engaged with the person that hired you, maybe the person that supervises you, I think one of the things that one of the comments that I get most is that we really, you really impress us, but really what impresses the most is that you're engaged and you're asking questions and you're continuing to say, well, this doesn't work, or maybe I tried this and I think there's a better way of doing it. I mean, we're there to add some value, and we're there, especially contractors, we're there to add value immediately. And so when you're going through training, and you're utilizing and you're starting to look at these new systems, ask a ton of questions and see if you can add value at some point. Another thing is that, ask what the thresholds of performance are. You've got to be able to understand what your job is. And so, they may tell you initially, or the agency that's, that brought you into the organization said, hey, your responsibility is going to be a contract sourcer. And so most of the time, you do, I guess, whatever you do, but most of the time you don't ask. A lot of people don't ask about what their thresholds of performance are. I ask all the time, like, am I hitting my goal? Are the candidates that I've sent over, and a lot of the time, especially if you're a contract sourcer, you'll send, candidates over and you just don't get any feedback. I want to know feedback. It's imperative for me to understand the candidates that I've developed, and if they're not, if those are good candidates and they're viable, and I like to know the percentage of individuals that I've presented. If the percentage that I've submitted, is a high percentage of individuals that they want to look at and pursue. And for me, getting feedback on those candidates also, again, it helps to fine tune my search. If I'm able to get feedback from even the recruiter, about the people that I've developed, I want to be able to know, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? I think a large part of, being a contractor, and, you're a little bit, you're doing what you can to keep the job, but also, a lot of the time it's hard for people to hear constructive criticism. And I ask for that all the time. Like, what can I do better? Like, I know that I'm not perfect, and I'm trying to develop the best candidates that I can for this opportunity. But, I want to know, just honestly, like, what can I do better of the candidates that I've submitted? Another thing is that once once you understand the thresholds of performance and what's expected of you, look at the process. And I mean, we're most of the people that I know, especially that work in this business, are intelligent people. Being able to offer, anything that adds value, or, saying, hey, look, I've looked at this process. I think that there's something that we can do a little bit better now. Like, I'm kind of new here, but as I'm looking, at the organization, as I'm looking at what we're responsible for, there's a couple of areas that I think we can actually improve upon. Those comments, most of the time, fall on ears that really appreciate those type of comments.
Okay. So ask a bunch of questions
Yeah,
when you first get there. Don't
ton.
just, don't just take for granted what they said you
Exactly.
should be doing, and kind of, kick back and go, all right, I'm here. I'm going to get started on sourcing and start
Right.
submitting candidates. Um,
Yeah.
so I, I'm gonna say this and want to kind of get your reaction to it. I've done a lot of consulting and engagements in various modalities,
Yeah.
and I see this mistake a lot with people that come on board, whether it's a contract recruiter or a contract sourcer, but it happens to especially be prominent among sourcers, and that is that they make the assumption that, or they make an assumption about what the client wants as an end result. In other words, when they come in their first couple of weeks, they just start doing what they know how to do, what they've done before. For example, they might source and screen candidates, and when they have a really good qualified candidate, then they present the candidate to the hiring manager. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, yeah, uh, that sounds pretty good. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to do? But here's the thing, I have run into all kinds of situations where people did exactly that and they failed. So, for example, one time, and there's more than one, just highlighting one particular example. There was, there is a recruiter that I respect very highly, um, and they're probably one of the best recruiters I've ever worked with. This particular recruiter has they're known for, they have the, I don't know if the habit or just the work style, but what they're known for is a 1-to-1 ratio. So
Hmm.
they present someone and they get hired. Okay. This is what they're known for. Now, sometimes they do 2-to-1, but usually it's 1-to-1. And this is their thing. Okay. So this recruiter, sourcer, whatever you want to call it, shows up on the contract, and they go out and they start digging and digging and digging. A week goes by, 2 weeks go by. The client is asking me, where are my candidates? And I'm like, what? We've talked to 500 people. We've screened this many people. We'll be presenting somebody to you soon. And another week goes by, and basically the client just has had it, and they're like, we need to let him go and find somebody else. This
Right.
person's not working for us right now, or they're
Right.
not working for us. And I was like, I scratched my head going, this is literally one of the best recruiters I've ever known. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
this doesn't make any sense. So I called up the recruiter and I'm like, hey, so the client's asking me, what, why you haven't sent any candidates? And of course, I kind of knew what he was going to say, and I was hoping he didn't say it. But he's like, well, yeah, I've already, interviewed all these people and all that. And I was like, did you send them a report? No. Did you
Yeah.
send them a list of people? No. I'm only going to send them the candidate that they want to hire. Remember, I do 1-to-1. And I'm like, okay, let me ask you this. Did you ask the client if they wanted a finalist or if they wanted something else? And he's like, no, I didn't. I just assumed that they wanted a candidate that was ready to go and hireable, and that, that they would want to hire. Like, that's my thing. That's what I do. Yeah, but did you explain that to them? And or did you like any? Nope, not at all. So 3 weeks into this, they get cut, and they get cut because they showed no work.
Right.
Now, I want to kind of toss that over to you and ask you, what would you have done in that situation? Because it is what he does, and he is successful. And if he had gotten maybe one more week, he would have presented a candidate that would have been hired.
Right.
But
Right.
instead, he got canned.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a pretty simple question. And yes, I see that all the time. I see
You would
individuals.
think it's a simple question, right?
Right. You think it's a simple question, right? But I
But I
see.
see it all the time too, where they do something different, but again, it's not what the client expected.
Right, right, right. I've had that situation occur where I've had really, really good people that I've worked with, and they found a new job and they ended up losing it really quickly. I'm like, how did that happen? You had the same thing happen to you. But for me, one of the most critical components that I have, and especially with what I've done, so I've consulted on my own for a number of years, and I'm a 1099. So, I know that, it's for me, it's eat what you
Hey, hold
kill.
on. For those of you out there that don't know what that means, because you know, sorry, buddy, but like sometimes people can't, follow your thought pot, your
Yeah.
speed there. 1099 is a contractor, an independent contractor. So essentially, if you've ever worked a job where you're not an employee, but you get a W-2 check where they withhold your taxes and all that, you don't have benefits, or you don't, that's a different kind of contractor. The 1099 is essentially a corp to corp or an independent contractor. There's no tax withholding, and it's a straight hourly bill rate. For the most part, they expect you to pretty much provide your own tools. They might give you a company computer or whatever, but it's very much an independent contractor, which is different than a W 2 contract. I get just explaining. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So, being an independent contractor and also working for a number of RPOs, especially and most recently Korn Ferry, one of the most important things that we can do. I mean, there are a lot of talented people that I've worked with at Korn Ferry, and I'm really impressed by people's backgrounds. But the biggest failing that we've had in some areas, especially with some of the newer clients, is that a lot of these talent consultants, they're just not communicating. They're not sharing the metrics of what they're doing for you. They're not sharing their activity. For me, that's a critical component of being able to gain the trust of the client that you're working for. And you have to be able to be transparent about what you're doing. In that vein, not only are you able to show them what you're able to do, it's also okay to share some of the difficulties that you're having and some of the challenges. And really, for me, I always like to lean on the clients. And if I'm having difficulty in an area, like, for instance, I had a really difficult hardware position that I was wanting to fill with HPE, and I was hitting a wall, and I was not seeing the number of prospects out there just because I was looking for a particular set of skills. And I got back to the manager, and he was like, "That's not a lot of reach outs, that you've had." And I said, "Yeah, I'm having some challenges, and I really want to talk about this." And so we were able to have a good, lengthy conversation about what are some of the aspects of experience that this manager would accept. But also, he said, I've had the same difficulty before, and here's some ideas that I had about developing additional candidates. And here, he also put me in touch with the team.
Sorry, you
And
went out there for a second.
Yeah, no worries. And he put me in touch with the team and said, "Hey, listen, why don't you work with the team because the hardware location was actually a position that was worked there in the office in Washington State." And so three of the people that I talked to said, "Yeah, man, we've got some connections out here," and they were able to set me up and at least get me in front of at least 20 different people. But for me, you've got to be able to share, the activity of what you're doing each week and explain it to the manager. I mean, they appreciate that. You're your stakeholder. They appreciate that more than you can even imagine. They're like, "Okay, I get it. I understand what he's doing." And not to get into the minutia of it, just give them a good high level overview of what you're doing. And again, it's not always going to be sunshine and roses. Sometimes you're going to have difficulties. And with that, you have to be able to share some of the challenges that you're having. If you can, I think you can earn trust a lot quicker with the client. And at least they understand what the playing field looks like. They're able to say, okay, and I tell them most of the time, especially with an intake call, look, with this position, in my history, it's taken at least a week and a half to develop good candidates. And so here's what's involved in that process. And so my touch bases with clients is very high. I generally touch base at least 3 days a week. Some clients I touch base, every day if necessary. But for me, it instills that sense of confidence, and I want to help them understand what I'm doing. But also, it's not only just good for them; it's good for you. It gives you a sense of accountability and responsibility, and you're like, look, I've got to be able to get these things done. That way you don't get lost, looking at some post, or some email, and you're like, where was I? What was I doing? You've got to have some accountability and understand exactly what your responsibilities are, and reminding yourself, by having that connection is a good thing to do.
Okay. Hey, we had a question from somebody in the audience. Yeah, they said he's back because you like muted for just a second. But there's a question from someone in the audience, which first of all, thank you. I'm flattered, but this is a great legit question. What are the best questions to ask sources? I've got a few I've talked about on the show, but let's hear from you. You hire sources for your sprint teams. What are the best questions that you ask sources when you're interviewing them?
Yeah, I ask them about their process, and I want to know what their methodology is, or if they have a methodology. For me, it's for me, and I will tell you, when I'm interviewing, I really have 4 categories that I look at, and one is really, have they created a sourcing strategy? Number 2, what do they do to identify or find prospects? Number 3, what do they do to engage prospects? And number 4, when they submit qualified candidates to recruiters, what are the expectations that they have for the stakeholder? And if I can, I'd like to go into detail about some of those. So when I'm asking the sourcer, what their sourcing strategy is, number 1, I want to hear things like, they coordinated with the stakeholder, and or recruiter to determine the basic qualifiers, and once engaged, what do they do to stay in constant contact with that stakeholder, which we just talked about. I also ask about, what do you do about the ATS? I mean, most ATS, like you and I, Shally, we work together. We weren't able to do a search within your ATS, but there are some that you can, like Taleo and Bullhorn. You can do different searches. So I want to know whether or not they're able to utilize that search technology and or technique, because there are some candidates that might be, already interested and have applied to a different position that may not be the position that or the title that you're necessarily responsible for, but there may be someone in the applicant tracking system that you may have an interest in. So it's worth looking at them. I also, want to know whether or not they utilize the CRM. Do they have any organization to do anything like that?
Okay, so do they utilize? So you're asking the sourcer if they use a CRM.
Or
I'm just going to come out and say it. What if they don't? I mean, no offense to anybody that's listening here, but you can kind of do this job with a crayon and a piece of paper. I mean, that could be your CRM. If you had no other choice, and you could use a chisel in a tablet if you needed to. So it's not like, I get what you're saying, but what if they haven't had the advantage to?
That's
right?
fine. That's fine. As long, to me, I'm going to be
So
able
you're
to
thinking more like, how do they track? You're asking more like, how do you track candidates? Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
how do you track candidates? How do you track your pipeline? Because I will tell you this, when I do a search, and some of the searches that I do are really extensive, and so when I'm sending out a ton of emails, I want to know who I've reached out to. And LinkedIn's really good about saying, oh yeah, you've reached out to this candidate. But if you're doing it off of an X-ray search, you don't have any tracking system there. So you've got to, at least, even at the bare minimum,
Some spreadsheet or
write a spreadsheet,
Outlook or something.
paper, whatever it is.
Right.
Jot down who you've reached out to, because number 1, you don't want to look like an idiot reaching out to them more than one time, because they're going to be like, well, what is
Hey,
this?
you're the third person that's called me from this company today.
Yeah, right. But with that, as long as I want to be able to hear that they're utilizing some sort of organization technique. Another one with the sourcing strategy is I want to find out what their sourcing channels are. I want to know what tools that they're utilizing or what tools that they have access to or what they've utilized in the past and how that's worked for them. I want someone to be able to, like you and I, Shally, when we talked, it was really about when I was doing work for you, you'd asked about the Boolean strings and developing that. To me, you've got to be able to understand Boolean logic, and you've got to be able to utilize that in a way that's constructive and productive. And you've got to know your way around that. There's no two ways about it. When you do X-ray searches, to me, X-ray searches is probably one of the things that I do most, and so understanding Boolean logic is important. I also, I ask about, what they do, above and beyond, regarding their sourcing strategy, and I want to hear things like, they develop, and they utilize the hiring manager or, the employer's network. I, ask them about the basic requirements, and we talk about tangible and intangible skills, what's acceptable, what's not. We really talk about BQs, and by BQs, I mean basic qualifiers. Like, what do we need at a minimum for this candidate to have in order to be considered? When you develop a sourcing strategy, to me, you have to understand, and for me, it's bear with me, hold on one second. You have to understand the different silos of your sourcing strategy. For me, it's business intelligence, it's recruitment technology, sourcing technology, search engines, sourcing media, and marketing. And so marketing to me is a really big part of that. And part of the sourcing strategy too is I want to hear about their metrics and their response rates, and I want to hear whether or not they're able to or think about being able to review and retool weekly based on the reports that are provided to them. To me, that's crazy important. In another silo, when you're finding or identifying prospects, through, when you're doing that, when you identify companies that are tier targets, you really need to identify companies with similar tech stacks. I mean, if you're not doing that, you're fishing in the wrong pond, so to speak. But you need to look at tier 1 and tier 2 competitors, look at the tech skill hubs. I mean, there's a tech stack website out there that looks at the tech stacks of different companies that you could target. I think being able to utilize, tools like Elusify, LinkedIn, of course, GitHub, Rocket Reach, Seek Out, X-ray searches. There's a couple of good X-ray
Are you
searches.
asking them about all these? Are you giving them the tools and they're saying yes, or are you asking for them to tell you which ones?
I'm asking about what they utilize, when they're identifying prospects. Like, what type of tools do you utilize? And I want to hear things like, like Elusify or Seek Out or Rocket Reach, or maybe different X-ray searches, because I don't want them to be just limited to LinkedIn. And so, a lot of the average sourcers that I run across utilize just LinkedIn only, or maybe just Indeed. They just stick to that. Like with this, and I say this all the time, this isn't, sourcing and recruiting. It's not a science, and it's not an art. It's really a combination of both. But really, for me, it's more about being creative and being able to understand. And that's what I want to hear when I ask sourcers questions. I want to hear about what they're doing to identify different prospects. And so, in the category of engaging prospects, I want to hear things like, how are they managing the reach outs, and what types of tools that they're utilizing. I want to hear, I want to hear some consistency in terms of if they're utilizing metrics or some of the metrics they've utilized in the past. Because if I'm not
Or are they even tracking it? You know what does it really irritates me?
Yeah, like what you
To no
doing
end is when I ask a sourcer, so about how many people did you submit per week? I don't know. Okay, how many people did you interview per week? I don't know. How
Right.
many emails did you send out? I don't know. Now I get that all these are just, it doesn't matter how many emails you send out, and I don't manage, this. I don't manage by KPIs like that. It's absolutely pointless. But um, I would expect I would expect a sourcer that's just paying
Minimum.
attention without
Right.
even tracking to be able to
Right.
say, well, last week I sent about 12 or,
Yeah.
submittals, and I emailed maybe about 400 or 500 people, because you would look at your, inbox, and even just know. So when they're completely clueless, like have no idea, that, I don't know, that doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, that's what we'll do there. And I'm going to tell you this. To me, there's a really, really critical and important aspect to what we're doing. And for me, it's really about, when you engage prospects, you're doing something that's very important. And what you're doing is you need to discuss, and I want to hear this, when they engage prospects, what do you tell them about the employer? I want the sourcer to be able to talk to me about their previous employees and say, here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the employer brand or different employment experiences with candidates, because that's what you're selling to people that are looking for new jobs. I mean, this isn't just hey, this is all about me and I'm trying to get this job and I'm really good at what I do. And
Right, right,
you're
right.
really affecting people's livelihood, and you're getting them to change jobs. I mean, that's a big deal. So for me, really being able to discuss not only the employer brand, but the employment experience and what people think about that company. But the most important thing is that, what the expectations are for that particular position. And so I want to be able to hear when I ask a sourcer, what do you tell candidates? I want to be able to hear that. And and what about candidates that
What do you talk
respond?
about? How do you ask questions? What kind of questions you ask? Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I've done that, and sometimes I get that. Well, it depends on the client. Like, no, 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 no. I don't mean client specific, right? Like, I don't mean what do you ask candidates that are Java developers or whatever. I mean, what is it? I want to hear how you talk to candidates and what kinds of things you say, not specifically related to the job. Yeah.
exactly. And it's always important, because for me, it's always important just to have that conversation, not just to say. And I've had recruiters say, "Hey, do you have this skill set? Do you have this technology?" Yes. Okay, great. I've literally had somebody have a 3-minute conversation with me and submit me to an opportunity. And for me, I literally just emailed the guy and said, "Look, I don't think I'm really interested because I know I'm going to get lost in the mix." I want them to have a meaningful conversation with me, and I want them, I want to hear whether or not the sourcer is going to be able to advocate for this individual, because the sourcer has to have enough knowledge about the individual to say, you know what, the hiring manager pushes back a little bit. You're going to have pushback. You're going to have to push back too and say, look, here's the reason you need to talk to this person, and you may not read what you may not see what you want on this person's resume, but I'm telling you, this is the person you need to talk about, and here are the reasons why. But with engaging prospects, I think another important aspect is I want to hear what they do with candidates that don't get the job or don't go through to the final round. Do they follow up with those individuals? I mean, when you're representing a stakeholder or an employer, you're part of that brand, even as a contractor, and you've got to be able to close them out in a professional, respectful way. And if you can do that, they may look at that opportunity again down the road or may want to work with you. So anyway, the last one, like
So
I
I
said,
want to address this thing that
yeah,
Steve Rawlings
yeah,
posted about. It really does depend on the job he's working on. So how many outreach messages or how many phone screens you do is definitely going to vary. But what I was saying is that um, what types of questions you ask
right,
doesn't matter what the job is, right? When you're talking to candidates, it doesn't matter if the candidates in technology or medical. There's a few things that you have to ask. What I'm talking about are, when would you be available? What would your salary expectations be? These are the standard questions, right? Not the technical questions. But yeah, Steve, you're right. I mean, if you need to hire somebody who's like uh, principal architect with back end experience that knows some arcane language, then you're gonna need a lot
yeah.
more candidates, because you have no idea. Sometimes you're not going to have those skill sets. So yeah, that part of it definitely varies. Oh man, this is a good one. I'm not touching this one, man.
Okay,
You
I can
take
touch
this
it.
one.
I can touch it.
All right,
Okay,
touch it.
is sourcing becoming easier? It's not the case. I mean, yes, there are a lot more people available, but again, you want to be able to utilize the same methodology and screening techniques. I mean, there are some people that are pretty eager because they don't have a job, but you still have to stick with your standards of screening, screening these individuals. And so, no, it's not becoming easier. I mean, it. You probably got a lot more people to look at. That's really what the case is, and so you've got to be,
Sometimes,
you've
yeah,
got to be really diligent about looking through the individuals that are available. So
right. That's true. So, in other words, um, and this is something that I've maintained for a while, not now, not just for the pandemic, but for a while. Um, it's what we do isn't about finding a needle in a haystack. That's actually pretty easy. Um, it's finding a needle in a stack of needles. In other words, sourcing isn't about, there's only one candidate out there. And if you type in these three keywords, bing, the candidate pops up and they're the only one. No, that's not the case. Man, you type in those three keywords and you get 27,000 candidates that all have those skills. So now you got to go a little bit deeper, and then you do the outreach and you get 20 people that reply, and you got to talk to them, and you got to figure out which one of those 20 that you talk to are qualified or not qualified, or the hiring manager is going to like or not like. And once you got your 10 that you qualified that you like, that you think the hiring manager is going to like, you still have to figure out which ones you're going to present first, because you don't want to send the hiring manager 10 people like my buddy that used to only send one or two at the most. So it's not about, sourcing isn't boiling the ocean to get to the pearl. Sourcing is more like, do we need a pearl? What type of pearl? Is it a white pearl, black pearl? Is it a gray pearl? How big does the pearl need to be? Does it really need to be a pearl, or it can be, does it need to be natural, or can it be manufactured? You know what I'm saying? And so once you have all the answers, once you know it's got to be an organic pearl, it's got to be an organic black pearl from the Pacific. Now you have to go find several pearls to find the one that's the right size and shape and quality. That's sourcing. It's a needle in a stack of needles. All of them look alike, but the one that you need is in there somewhere, and you can't just type a keyword and you get the results.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well said.
Anyway,
I think too. Yeah.
Let's we got to wrap up because we're a little bit over time here. But can you give us one knockout question? Something that you would always ask a sourcer, and it would like literally say, in or out, right? Like, if you can get this right, I'll continue the interview. If you can't get this right, we're done.
Let me think about that one. For me, it's always about value and what you can bring to the table.
Sure, but that's the quality of the sourcer. I'm talking about, do you have one question that would literally, like, just not, if you can't do this, you are fully out. It's not whether or not you're the best of the candidates, but you're just completely fully out, right?
Yeah, I would. Okay. One of them would be, could you create a Boolean string for me right now that would, for a software engineer, back-end development, listing the skills, and create a Boolean string with the actual location. And I think you would ask me this question too. For me, it's a pretty simple Boolean string.
Right. Like, how would you use a location?
How would you put in a location? Like, for me, if you can do that, you can create some magic.
Okay. Fair enough. Appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot for your time, and it's good to have you here.
Yeah, good to see you, Shally.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. See you next Friday.
Bye.